Continuing the dinim of tzedakah, the halacha is like this. Tzedakah is like a neder, like a vow. Which means if a person says he's going to give tzedakah, even though he didn't actually give over the money yet, he can't change his mind. In fact, the Gemara says, Amirase l'gveya k'msirase l'hedyet. When you speak to somebody, to Hegdish, or it simply means to the Beis Hamikdash, to Hashem, it's considered as if you gave it over to somebody else. What does that mean? Just like if I give you something, I can't take it back because you acquired it already. When it comes to Hegdish, or Tzedakah for that matter, the din is, if I verbalize a pledge to Tzedakah, I have to give it. In Shulchan Aruch and Halachos of Tzedakah it says that even if you pledged it in thought, you didn't promise verbally you're going to give X amount to tzedakah. You pledged it in thought. The proper thing, Shulchan Aruch says, even though Bezdin can't make you give it, but the proper thing is you should make sure, as it says, V'dever emes b'lvavoi, you speak truth in your heart. And one of the things that means is if you pledge tzedakah, even mentally, you should give that money to tzedakah. Therefore, if somebody pledges money for poor people, let's say, he has to give it immediately to the poor people. And if he doesn't, then he's transgressing a negative commandment of Baal Sa'achar, not to pay up tzedakah late or hegdish late. Now what happens if there's no poor people? Same thing applies, by the way, Purim. You have to give matanos avyenim. What happens if you live in a city there's no poor people? So halacha says you put away the money, you designate the money, and then when there's poor people, you give it to them. The same thing if a person pledges money to poor people, so then the din is, if there's no poor people around, you have to separate the money, put it away, and then give it to poor people when you have it. If somebody says, I will give tzedakah to this and this person, until that particular person comes, you're not over, you're not transgressing, because you said clearly, when this guy comes, that's when you're going to give it. The next din is like this. A person who forces others to give tzedakah, the Gemara uses the expression, Gadol ha'ma'usa yosem min ha'isa. One who forces somebody to give tzedakah, but the expression goes, ma'asin ala tzedakah, Bezin would force people to give tzedakah, that's even greater than the person giving himself. Why? Because it says, v'haya ma'isa tzedakah sholem, the act of giving tzedakah is peace, and therefore the din is that you have to give it. Forcing somebody to give tzedakah, in fact, is a big mitzvah. And he says like this: what happens if you're a gabi tzedakah? It means you collect tzedakah for poor people, and the poor people make you crazy. They make you crazy because they want more money from you. You know, everything they make you crazy. He says, don't worry about it. Because the more crazy they make you, the greater is your schus. The greater they make you nuts, the greater merit you have. So it says the Gabi Tzedakah shouldn't worry that they're being made crazy by all the poor people. Or by the rich people, by the way. Like we said, the poor are willing to receive and the poor rich are not willing to give. Okay, so therefore, whatever it is, there's certain tzedakahs that Bezdin of each city. First, I'll give you an example. Moris Chitim. Yeah, before Pesach, they give Moris Chitim. In the time of the shtetl, the way Moris Chitim worked, literally means money for wheat. Okay, they would give money to buy wheat, and there was that they would bake matzah. That's why it's called Moris Chitim, because Chitim actually means wheat. But basically, the bottom line of it is giving money to the poor people. In the shtetl, the way it worked with Moris Chitim was the Rav of the city. Don't forget, it wasn't the big city. The Rav of the city would evaluate how much money he felt every person should give Moris Chitim, and that's what he forced you to give. And if you didn't give the money, they went into your property and took it away. That's the way it used to work in the shtetl. Today, I don't suggest you do that. You might end up in jail. But that's the way it used to work. So there was a din, takama'asin ala tzedakah. Bezdin would force people to give certain tzedakahs that they had to give. For instance, even in the taxes in the cities, the shtetls also had, the small communities had taxes. They were like today, you have income tax, but there were certain taxes. So, one tax, the Talmidei Chacham were not obligated to pay. And that was for Shmira. for protection. They used to they have a wall around it, they would hire a guard to protect the city at night. So that tax, the Gemara says, Talmidei Chachamim are potter from. Why are they potter from it? Because the Gemara says, Torah of the Talmid Chacham protects him. So he doesn't need that protection. If he doesn't need the protection, you don't pay for what you don't need. So Bezdin couldn't force him to pay money for that. There's a very interesting story we mentioned many times with the Rogachover. The Rogachover lived in Poland, and he didn't speak Polish. He didn't read Polish, he didn't speak Polish. He spoke Yiddish or whatever. So one time he gets a letter from the Polish government in the mail that he has to pay X amount of different taxes that the Polish government would enforce to the people. So he got lazy, he couldn't read it, so he gave it to one of his kids to read, and the kid reads the letter to his father. He says, okay, the government says this tax you have to pay X amount, this tax X amount, this tax X amount. So the Rabbi says to him, I live by Torah. According to Torah, this tax I have to pay, I'll pay. This tax I don't have to pay, I'm not paying. So his children said to him, Father, this is not Torah over here, this is the government, you have to pay. He said, I live by Torah, the tax of Torah doesn't make me pay, I'm not paying. The next day or so, he gets a letter in the mail from the government. They made a mistake, and the tax that he said he doesn't have to pay, they said, Taki, you don't have to pay. There was a Jew that lived with Torah. But there are certain taxes which is a gather of tzedakah. Now the whole question is, if a person buys a mitzvah in a shul, could that be counted as tzedakah or not? You pay for whatever, Hagved, Lila, Aliyas, can you count that as tzedakah? So there's a whole question, halacha about it. The bottom line halacha and today practical halacha is that you could deduct it from tzedakah money, especially if that was your intention to begin with, that could be part of your tzedakah money. Except, most poskim hold, of contemporary poskim at least, that if you buy a seat in a shul for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that's not meiser deductible. Why isn't it meiser deductible? Because you're buying a seat, it's your seat. Nobody else can take it away from you. So it's not you're giving money to tzedakah. You're buying the ability to sit in the seat. So therefore that wouldn't be counted as tzedakah according to most opinions. Now there's an interesting shaila. What's with schar limud, tuition? This is a really big issue. Can tuition be counted as tzedakah money? No. Why? Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. Now to preface this din, the din is like this. Can I buy a pair of tefillin from tzedakah money? I need a pair of tefillin, so I'll give my meiser money, I'll buy myself a pair of tefillin, or a talis, or lulav, an esrig, or whatever. So the din is obviously you cannot. Why? Because something you're obligated to do, you can't, it's not tzedakah. You have an obligation to do it. Just like you have to eat. You have an obligation to put on tefillin every day. So therefore tefillin cannot be deducted from tzedakah. I'm talking buying your own pair of tefillin. Now, when it comes to tuition, there's an obligation on a father to teach his son Torah. Therefore, really, the father has an obligation to teach his son to study with his son the whole day. That ain't gonna work for a lot of reasons. So therefore, you have what's called the father used to hire a teacher, a malamed, to learn with the kids. Today we have something called schools. So the school is teaching you to Rebbe, and the school is teaching your child Torah. But the problem is, that's really the father's obligation. It's an obligation that he has. So he can't get out of it by giving tzedakah, so to speak. It's his own obligation. So now the question is, what's with girls? Well, we're not done yet. What's with girls? So l'chayra, somebody could say, and there's a lot of tshuvas written about this, that the father is not obligated to teach his daughter Torah. It says, "L'marta meisam es b'neichem," right? V'shinantam levanecha. You have to teach your sons. Girls are not obligated to learn Torah. So some poskim want to say that tuition for a girl is deductible from tzedakah money because it's not an obligation. Other poskim disagree, and it's mashma like that from the Alter Rebbe, that they disagree. And they write, granted a father doesn't have an obligation to teach his daughters Torah, nevertheless, he has a halachic obligation to make sure she knows those mitzvahs that she has to keep, that she grows up to be a proper Jewish girl, wife, mother, a proper Yiddish girl, that keeps mitzvahs. So today, years ago in the shtetls, there was no such, before Sarah Schneerer came out with the Beis Yaakovs and all that, in the frum circles, there was no girls' school. So where did the girls learn everything they needed to know? From their mother and their grandmother, who lived in the same house, by the way. The mother, the parents, the grandparents, they all lived in the same house. So therefore, the mother, the grandmother taught the girl everything she had to know. Today it doesn't work like that. The mothers don't teach anything, basically, about it. So where do they learn it? They learn it in school. So now the shaila is, so this is an obligation the father has. Can he deduct this obligation for girls' tuition? Can he deduct it from tzedakah or not? So there's a very big controversy about this whole issue. But there's certain ways to get out of it. What happens, I'm going on a low end. What happens, you pay $5,000 tuition. Let's say that's your tuition. And you come to the school, and you make up with the school. This doesn't work for the IRS. But you can make up with the school, Lamashal, you tell the school, listen, I'm giving you the $5,000. Let's count $2,500 tuition and $2,500 tzedakah. Now you can't get a tax write-off because it doesn't work like that in the government. But halachically, you can't say, okay, $1 $4,999 tzedakah, $1 tuition. I mean, that's unreasonable. But if you say the amount that scholarships would get, let's say, so you say to the school, you know what, I'm giving you $2,500. If the school agrees to it, the school might not agree with it. But you say $2,500, I'm giving you tzedakah. $2,500, I'm giving tuition, so then you can count $2,500 for tzedakah. There's another way of doing it, which I haven't seen done, but I've seen this brought down in Poskim, that I pay your kids' tuition, you pay my kids' tuition. I'm not obligated to teach your kid. So when I give the school money for your kids' tuition, that's tzedakah. And you pay for my kids' tuition. Today I don't think the schools go for that. But anyway, there's also, the question is that's going to work. But otherwise, it doesn't necessarily work. What?
The second choice, I like it better. You go to the school and tell them that this amount is tzedakah, this amount is tuition.
You're not going to get a tax receipt for it.
Do they have to accept it?
No, I said the school might not agree.
Even though they don't agree, you can't do that?
No, if they don't agree, you can't. No. You can't come to the school if they don't agree and you can't give them, you're not giving them tzedakah. Then you're not...
Is that until bar mitzvah or voice? When does the obligation...
That's another question. Until when is the father obligated to teach his kid Torah?
What if the grandparents pay?
Oh, so now the question, what with grandparents? Is that an obligation or is not an obligation? Well, that's not true. It says, "Ve'idaitam levanecha ve'levnei vanecha." You would teach it to your children and your grandchildren. If those that say the Sheikh Schidus every day, we say it over there. One of the Schidus about Matan Torah says, "Ve'idaitam levanecha ve'levnei vanecha." So according to halacha, by the way, if for whatever reason it is a parent can't pay tuition, there is a halachic obligation on the grandparents.
So what's the age?
So now, 300. Now the question is, what type of obligation is it? Now what happens if the child technically could pay, but the grandfather is helping him out, so then that could be counted as tzedakah. But in technical, I haven't seen it done. Well, I've seen it done in schools. If a kid can't pay, a parent can't pay, halachically, there is an obligation on the grandparents to pay. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch, in Halachos of Tzedakah.
Rabbi, if I buy somebody else tefillin for somebody else,
if you buy somebody else tefillin because they can't afford it,
right,
that's definitely tzedakah. That's definitely tzedakah money. Or anything that you do for somebody else, and not because, there's a multimillionaire and you want to buy him a pair of tefillin. Now, it's possible, by the way, what happened, the guy has a ton of money, but he's not interested in spending it on tefillin, and you make up with him, if I buy you tefillin, you'll wear tefillin? And he says yes, so then you could count that as tzedakah, because he's spiritually poor. Not a good... he doesn't have the money for tefillin because he doesn't want to do it. So then, even though the guy is loaded, you can still pay for his tefillin with tzedakah if he wouldn't do it otherwise. But Stam, you want to give, I'll give you another example. You give a wedding present. Can that be counted as tzedakah? So not really. I mean, you know, in essence, you're hopefully covering your meal expense. But even that, so if, let's say, there's a poor chassan and kala, let's say, for argument's sake, a normal chassan and kala, you give $36, let's say. And because they're poor, you want to give them $100. So then that is $64, you can count as tzedakah for sure, because you're giving it because it's tzedakah. Huh?
The Chatan has to pay the Maaser on the gifts.
Chassan has to pay Maaser on the gifts that they get.
How about wedding expenses of the parents? Is it?
Can parents count the tzedakah money for the kids that they pay for the kids' wedding? It's questionable in halacha. What?
You make up with the schools certain X amount this and that. So why wouldn't they agree? They're getting the same amount bottom line at the end anyway.
I can't speak for the schools.
Well, why would they care?
I promise you, if somebody wants to give me $100,000 to the shul, and you tell me $50,000 tzedakah, $15,000 membership, I'll take it. No questions asked. In that case, for the shul, I can even give you a receipt for the $100,000.
Right. In New York, where the state pays the tuition, so the parents.
Pleasant dreams.
They don't do that.
No, not New York, not yet.
Like in some
In
states.
Ohio, they have vouchers for schools. They mamish cover almost the whole tuition.
And we do it here too.
So-
There were how many times they're fighting with the government, they don't do it.